And we're back. I'm Dan Barker with co-host Annie Laurie Gaylor. We'll be speaking with the best-selling author, the famous Bible belter, as Richard Dawkins called him, Christopher Hitchens, author of the book God Is Not Great. And Christopher Hitchens will be headlining the 30th Annual Convention of the Freedom from Religion Foundation meeting next weekend in Madison, Wisconsin, October 12th and 13th, speaking on October 13th. There's still time to register through October 8th at ffrf.org, where you will find lots of information. Christopher Hitchens is contributing editor to Vanity Fair. He's author of many books, including a book on Mother Teresa, The Missionary Position, and, of course, the author of the best-selling God Is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Christopher, I read your book as soon as it came out, and I have to say that God Is Not Great is great.
Well, that's very generous of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for writing it.
Well, it was actually a pleasure, I have to say.
Now, you have been on the road ever since this book came out, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and I asked my publishers from the get-go to send me not on the conventional book tour, which is usually New York, Washington, Chicago, Seattle, L.A., San Francisco, that kind of thing, but to put us through the Mason-Dixon line and down into the South, and to ask for a debate partner from the other side at every stop. And that was, believe me, fun.
Wow. So you're preaching where they need to hear the sermons.
Well, yes, and I'm also preaching in an area where people resent it being assumed that they are all people of faith. A very common experience I found in places like Atlanta and Raleigh and where else did I go? All over the South, in Texas too, was that people came along thinking that they'd better come to hear me because otherwise I'd be the only atheist in the room, and found out that there was more company. Little Rock was another case, more company than they thought.
There's a lot more of us than you'd think.
Oh, very much so. And even among the faithful, this is what was proved by those who did, I must say very generously and usually very courteously, agree to debate with me, was that they're not very sure of themselves either, not as sure as they make out.
Well, you probably know the Bible better than they do.
I know it better than some of them do. I think I could claim that, but not as well as all. But I mean, to know it is, in most cases, to doubt that all or any of it can be taken literally. And this doubt is actually quite widespread. And after all, I didn't expect that by the end of the tour we would have a book from Mother Teresa saying she couldn't believe a word of it.
Isn't that something? The patron saint of atheism now.
Yeah, well, it means it's in very high places, so to say, that people cannot, in fact, force themselves for long to believe things that are, in the first place, self-evidently untrue, I would argue, but in the second and more disturbing case, are, in fact, immoral beliefs. Beliefs like vicarious redemption, that someone else can die for your sins and relieve you not just of your sins, but of your responsibility. That's obviously not moral preaching.
You have a whole chapter on that, religion as an original sin.
Well, I think that's in a sense what it is. It is an attempt to evade responsibility and to readopt the ancient practice of scapegoating, of quite literally taking a goat, hurling all the sins of the tribe on it, and then driving it into the desert, presuming it's taking the sins with them. We laugh when we hear that people used to do that, but we are supposed to be respectful when we see someone has a bumper sticker saying Christ died for my sins.
I like that line in your book, how much effort it takes to affirm the incredible.
Yes, there's a famous expression of Kierkegaard's, which is called the leap of faith. Why people respect this as much as they do, I don't honestly know. In other words, a leap away from reason, from the only faculty you have that distinguishes you from the other primates. But okay, I can see why some people esteem it. The problem is you can't make that leap just once and say, fine, I've cleared the gap, I'm on the other side now, I'm on the faith side. You have to keep making the leap and forcing yourself to keep saying you believe it. That's why people need churches. They have to keep getting together to chant it in company regularly.
To brainwash themselves.
If they were left to their own devices, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, because you don't see scientists getting together every Sunday morning holding hands and singing, gravity is real, yes, gravity is real, I believe in my heart. You
don't. And every single physicist, however say, or physician, however sure they are of their own innovations in the field, openly goes to his peers or her peers and says, if you can prove me wrong, I'll be really grateful because you'll have moved the whole ball down the field.
Now, we've got 3 minutes before our break. You were raised nominally religious. I mean, you were at least indoctrinated in your school in England.
Religious indoctrination is compulsory in the land of my birth. It's a legal obligation that the schools have to teach the Christian religion, and they also have to teach it as true.
Which is terrible. So how did you...
Yeah, but it leads to... Don't get too depressed. It also leads to the mass production of atheism. I mean, if there was compulsory school prayer in the United States, I wouldn't get the blues, because that would probably have the same effect.
You call yourself a Protestant atheist in your book.
Yes, I do come from the Anglican and Protestant tradition of the break between England and Rome.
So how did you...
The Protestant Revolution, the Reformation... people like Thomas Paine, some of the radical Protestants of the Cromwellian Revolution, who are in fact the ancestors of the American Revolution. It's that tradition of Christianity with which I sometimes respectfully, not always, disagree. The King James Bible, the Cranmer Prayer Book, the English hymnal.
So those are what turned you into an atheist?
That was I'd rather say I was fortunate that was my exposure to religious teaching, because I think it's much, in linguistic terms, to say, more beautiful.
Did you know that some of the hymns in the English hymnal were written by an atheist?
No, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Ralph Vaughan Williams was an atheist. And he
I actually think that, don't let me forget his name on the air, how terrible. The man who wrote Say Not the Struggle and Aught Availeth, Arthur Hugh Clough, appears to have had a crisis of faith as well. Those are some of the most beautiful of the hymns.
So did you ever really believe those things?
It wasn't that I didn't believe them or did believe them, or that I turned from them. It was that I discovered that I didn't have a moment on the road to Damascus, in other words. And I rather distrust people who do that in either direction. I just realized one day, I describe it in the book as quite a small boy, that I wasn't able to believe any of this stuff.
I'm Laurie Gaylor with Dan Barker for Freethought Radio on Air America Radio. We'll be right back talking with Christopher Hitchens.
We're back. I'm Dan Barker. We're back with Freethought Radio. That music you're listening to is Verdi's Dies Irae, the Wrath of God from Verdi's Requiem. Giuseppe Verdi was born on October the 9th, same day as John Lennon, in the year 1813. Although he did write that religious requiem, he was a lifelong atheist. He was an altar boy who grew up to stay away from priests.
And now we're back with our guest, Christopher Hitchens.
Hello, Chris. You still there?
Nice to be back.
So we were talking about you were...
Nice to be back, and I did not know that about Verdi. That's very interesting.
Yes, and his wife said he didn't believe in God, but she didn't think he was an atheist. And of course, not believing in God makes you an atheist. But yes, there's a wonderful history of songwriters who have enriched the world who did not believe in a God, but they could write Greek myth, Roman myth, and they could write from the Bible, which is what Verdi did.
Yes. It's often argued against me and my co-thinkers when we're debating with the faithful, well, has secularism ever created anything as wonderful as a cathedral or some of the devotional music and so forth? And I have various answers to this. One of these is that we don't know, and the Verdi point is very useful in this exact respect, because we don't know that Michelangelo, for example, was a believer. We do know that if he'd said he wasn't, he would not just not have got the job, he'd probably had a long and exquisitely painful death. So we cannot be certain that it's a genuine testimony of faith. The second is that there are many great buildings. I've written a book myself about the Parthenon, of expired religions that have to be, in my opinion, preserved and revered. I'm not like, I leave it to the people like the Taliban to blow up religious statues, or the parties of God in Iraq to blow up each other's mosques. I mean, that kind of obscenity is reserved for the faithful.
Well, if a composer...
you can revere... I think actually you could define one of our great cultural projects as how to preserve what has been left to us aesthetically by the religious centuries, without having to subscribe, say, to the cult of Pallas Athena, the goddess, or to Athenian imperialism.
If a composer wanted to eat back in those days, they had to write for the king or for the church.
That's pretty much true, yeah.
Who was paying them to write their music?
By the way, just to be fair, I think that people like John Donne and George Herbert, who I greatly admire, writers of devotional poetry, it must be they weren't working for patrons. And it also must be a lot harder to fake, if you like, a devotional poem, which you have to really write yourself, than if you're a painter, just turn your hand to doing the nativity or the crucifixion, which you could do whether you believe in it or not. As Goya seems to have done in his paintings